Hello, in this Coolgrad video, we're going to talk about how to shortlist universities based on your profile. Most students need to keep in mind that they cannot apply to too many universities, and it's not a good idea to apply to very few universities either. It's recommended that you apply to at least 6 or 8 good universities, and based on your profile and which country you want to study in and which program you want to study in and the reputation of the university, the cost of living, and so many other factors, this video will guide you to shortlist universities progressively. First of all, let's talk about the admission requirements at various universities. What do universities really look for in applicants? First of all, they're looking for good undergraduate GPA. So you have to have a good background in your undergraduate level in these courses so that you can progress to a master's or PhD level. That's like the most important thing they look at. Even if you have a fabulous GRE or GMAT score, and if your recommendation letters are good, if you don't have enough background in the subject, they're going to either deny your admission or probably ask you to take some prerequisite courses and then apply to the master's program at the university. GRE GMAT score. So that's the next most important thing. So a lot of people have very good GPA and good recommendation letters and a good statement of purpose, but they didn't do well in the GRE or GMAT exams, and because of that their prospects are ruined. A statement of purpose. A statement of purpose is a very important document, which is your personal statement talking about your career plans, your objectives, and why you want to pursue this program at this time in this particular university. Please watch my video about how to write a good statement of purpose, and that will guide you about do's and don'ts in a statement of purpose. The next most important thing is good recommendation letters. So even if you have all the good credentials, you need at least 2 or 3 people who have supervised your work, either in academics or in the industry, who can vouch for your academic integrity, who can vouch for your competence, and who can say a few good things about you. Good recommendation letters are very, very important. And I have separate videos about how to get a good recommendation letter too. Research publications. If you have ever published a paper, research paper in IEEE or in any famous conference or a journal, that is definitely going to add to your application, and you will be able to get, able to tremendously boost your chances of admission in any university. It's not easy to publish a research paper. And even if you worked for a reputed professor and the professor has published the research paper and you've just been a small contributor to the paper, if your name is mentioned on it, it adds a lot of weightage to your application. And the next important factor is to align your interests with the research interests of the faculty members of the university. I've seen a lot of candidates at the master's and PhD level who had their own interests, who wanted to work in particular areas, whether it's artificial intelligence or finance or whatever. And if none of the professors in that department were interested in that area, and if it didn't seem like your interests were aligned with the interests of the faculty members of the department, they're probably not going to give you admission. This is a very important factor. In fact, it happened to me once. I applied to a PhD program in the university, in a particular university, and even though I had excellent credentials and my GMAT score was like the best they had ever seen, and I mentioned that I wanted to work with 2 professors who were already like retired and they were not actively researching anymore. And my research interests didn't match with the research interests of any of the actively researching professors at the university. And because of that, I didn't get it. For a PhD program, they usually offer admission to only 2 or 3 people. And they offered it to 2 other candidates, even though their GMAT scores were lower than mine, their credentials were lower than mine. They offered it to them simply because their research interests aligned very well with the department's research interests. So another important factor that universities look at is about the potential of the candidate to complete the course successfully and graduate. They want to pick candidates who demonstrate maximum potential to successfully complete the program and graduate. They don't want people who will leave the course midway for whatever reason, whether it's financial constraints or whether emotional instability or whether they have a history of not completing a program. Whatever seems to make the university feel that this person is not going to graduate successfully is going to weigh their application down tremendously. I'm going to elaborate on each of these as we progress. The next thing universities look for is academic integrity. If you have ever been convicted in a crime or if you've been expelled from a university for academic dishonesty, it's going to weigh your application down tremendously, believe me. Sometimes universities say that they're not going to hold it against a person, but it will weigh your application down, believe me. So another important factor that universities look at is financial stability. You have to demonstrate that you have enough funds to support yourself throughout the program, even if the university does not offer you funding. And they also look at your TOEFL score. For international students, you have to demonstrate proficiency in English language through the TOEFL exam. So these are some of the things that universities look for. GPA is the most important factor. So in your undergrad, like say, suppose you were an engineering student in India and you had an overall percentage of like between 60 to 70%, then you shouldn't even be applying to like the top 10 universities or top 20 universities because your chances are very slim unless you have a research paper published in the topmost journals, unless you have like a, max the GRE and GMAT and you have an Olympic gold medal or something that will, make up for the low GPA. The GPA is one of the most important factors that universities consider. So try and review the profiles of the previously admitted students in the university. Try and see what kind of undergraduate GPA they had, what kind of GRE, GMAT scores they had, how many years of experience did they have, and how many, what did they score in the TOEFL? Did they have any research publications? Try and talk to your seniors at the universities where you're applying. Try and see what their profiles were like. So if that university gave admission to a lot of students who had an undergraduate GPA of only about, say, 3.0 or 3.2, that's approximately, say 60 to 70% in an engineering college in India, then maybe you can think you have some chance of getting in there. But a lot of topmost universities, like say top 30 universities, require a very high GPA, like 3.6 and above, in order to accept students, and they would also prefer someone who has got research publications. So if you're applying to MIT and Caltech and Stanford with a low GPA, you're just wasting your money in applications. Remember, it costs a lot of money to apply to universities. Each application costs about let's say $100 or $110, and sometimes at least $50. So you'll be wasting a lot of money and time. So shortlist universities where your chances of admission are max. So universities which offer funding, which accept students of your profile and your GPA. So consider the ranking and reputation of the university and also whether they accept students like you. It's not just about which university excites you where you want to be. You have to think about which university you're qualified to attend. Which university will be ready to accept you. That's what you need to think about. So most of the top universities like MIT, Harvard, and the Ivy League universities, they usually accept students only from IITs, NITs, and such institutions in India, and very rarely they accept people from like local engineering colleges, unless they have something extraordinary like an Olympic gold medal or maybe a research publication in a top journal. So maybe if you studied in the local regional engineering college and if you were a university rank holder, maybe you have a slim chance of getting into these top universities. And if you have great GRE and GMAT scores. Otherwise, you're just wasting money in applications. So if you have an above average GPA and good GRE, GMAT scores, you still probably stand no chance in getting into the top 10 or top 20 universities for a master's in computer science especially. So for MBA, I've seen students who did really well in GMAT with a few years of work experience and good recommendation letters and statement of purpose getting in, even if their undergraduate GPAs were not so high, because they look at the GMAT scores and so many other factors. But for a master's in computer science program or a PhD, you must realize all these programs are very, very competitive. And you're competing with people from across the world. There are people applying from China, from Japan, from Europe, from Australia, from all over the world to these universities. And the competition is just fierce. So you need to keep that in mind. So next most important thing that universities consider is GRE, GMAT scores. Exam scores are very important but may not be as important as your undergraduate GPA. But do remember that for for an MBA program, there are people from a variety of backgrounds who apply to these programs. So we've had people in our class who had an undergraduate degree in biology and in wildlife and physics, and one was a music teacher, and one was a sports instructor, some were from the military, and some people were engineers, some were doctors, some were law students. We had people from all kinds of backgrounds. So it's like comparing apples to oranges when you're assessing all these applicants. But they do usually look at a good history of performance in whichever profession you've been, and a good GRE GMAT score. So, for example, somebody might argue that a person got into music school simply because they could not get into a law school or medical school. They were just not smart enough, and that's why they studied music. You might argue that person might not have done well in her high school or in whatever earlier years, but the person might have performed really well in whatever field he or she took up. He must have been the best music teacher in that university and must have won a lot of awards at the national level. So regardless of what discipline you've taken, if you have excelled in that discipline, then you'll probably have a good chance of getting into an MBA program. So remember that there are very few universities which will accept candidates with a low GRE or GMAT score. And there are exceptions, of course. Like I had a friend, a German friend in my grad school, and he was a very, very brilliant, technically competent student. But he had studied all his undergrad and all his education in Germany in German language. So his English wasn't so good. I mean, he could communicate very well, but his grammar and vocabulary, they were not so expansive. I mean, he didn't know a lot of English words. So he took the GRE, he maxed the quantitative section, but in the verbal section he scored hardly like 20th or 30th percentile, really bad. But he had already been there in the university for one semester as an exchange student, and the university knew that he was simply brilliant and he could successfully graduate. So even though he got a low verbal score in the GRE, they admitted him to the graduate program, and within 1 year he came originally as an undergraduate student, exchange student, but in 1 year he graduated with a master's in computer science with a 4.0 GPA. So I'm saying, if the university knows you personally, or let's say your brother or sister has been studying at the university, or you've already established a rapport with the professor, you worked with him on some projects, if they already know you and they can vouch for your credentials and they think you have promise of graduating successfully, even if you don't have a good GRE GMAT score, they might give you admission sometimes. But most of the time, they would expect you to do really well in your GRE and GMAT. So it's worth spending a few months to prepare for these exams. A statement of purpose. So in my video on how to write a great statement of purpose, I've talked about the format of a statement of purpose, what it's supposed to convey to the admissions committee, and how your research interests must align very well with those of the professors and the faculty members of the department. Your statement of purpose must reflect a genuine passion to pursue this program at this time from this particular university. And a statement of purpose must be written very carefully after a lot of research and after multiple revisions and iterations. So it's worth spending at least a month to write a great statement of purpose. Recommendation letters. Recommendation letters are also very important. At least 3 lecturers or managers must be able to provide a recommendation letter vouching for your academic integrity and your competence and your aptitude for research. Recommendation letters must describe you as a very strong candidate with strong promise to graduate successfully. Many candidates have been rejected simply because one recommendation letter was screwed up or mediocre. And remember, it's always better to have no recommendation letter at all than to have one that's mediocre. So if at all you have a recommendation letter, it must vouch for your competence and say really good things about you and project you as a very strong candidate. And if a person is just going to say mediocre things about you, it's actually going to weigh your profile down. So watch my video about recommendation letters in order to see the format of a recommendation letter and how to get good recommendation letters. Strong promise to graduate. So admissions committees they don't want to have candidates who are probably going to drop off the course midway for whatever reason. They look for people who demonstrate very strong promise to successfully complete the program and graduate with a good GPA. So, for example, if you have a previous history of having left a program incomplete for whatever reason, you must have been pursuing some master's program or maybe some program outside the university, like say CCNA, Cisco Certified Network Associate, or MCSC, or some other such program, and if you have left it incomplete for whatever reason, they're going to hold it against you. Believe me, they will. So if you have to mention something in your application that you have left incomplete, think about whether it's really required that you mention it. I mean, if the university requires you to provide details of all the universities you've attended and all the programs you have undertaken, whether it's complete or incomplete, then maybe you have to mention it. But if you took up a program like, say, Salesforce certification, and you did 80% of it and you didn't really complete it, is that really something you should mention in your application? Think about it. And even about your previous academic history. If there's something that's going to weigh your application down, think about whether it's really mandatory to mention it in your application. So, remember that many top programs have a very low acceptance rate, like 10 or 20%, and they look for the slightest reason to reject candidates. And this is also surprising that universities look for candidates whose parents have master's or PhD degrees, meaning if there are two candidates who are equally qualified and the university can choose only one of them, they would probably pick the one whose parents are better qualified, because, well, it seems kind of unfair, but empirically speaking, it's shown that if a student's parents both have PhDs and they've graduated successfully, then the student somehow has a better probability of graduating successfully. They're just going to pick candidates who demonstrate maximum promise to graduate successfully. And even if you have done really well in your program earlier, for whatever reason you couldn't complete the program, but even if it's a very valid reason, like say you fell and broke your leg and you had to return home, or somebody in your family died and you went into depression, or due to financial constraints, or whatever reason, for whatever reason, if you could not complete a program, they're going to hold it against you. It's going to weigh your application down tremendously. So think about whether you really want to mention it in your application. Think about whether it's really required to be mentioned in your application. How many universities to apply to? So 6 to 8 is a good number of universities to apply to. So usually most people don't apply to more than 10 or 12 universities. Students are generally encouraged to apply to at least 6 or 8 universities. And applications are expensive, so it's not worth applying to more than 10 universities unless you come from a stinking rich family. So think about which 6 or 8 universities are best suited for your profile and apply only to those universities. So even if you go to a lot of career guidance agencies in India, you might have noticed they give you at least 2 low-ranked universities while shortlisting, because they want to make sure you get admission in at least one university. So usually it's good to pick some universities slightly higher ranked and some medium ranked where your chances are maximum, and at least one slightly lower ranked university where you're almost sure you're going to get admission. So shortlist these universities and apply. Which geographical locations to select universities in? So remember that a lot of Indian students who come especially from southern parts of India or even central India or even some parts of North India, they've never seen snow in their lives. A lot of them. It happened to me too. I come from Bangalore and I'd never seen snow in my life till I landed in Michigan for grad school. And it wasn't an easy transition. I landed there for the spring semester and all I saw was like snow for the next 5 or 6 months. They're not used to, the blizzards, the snow, the ice. It's very difficult to deal with such situations. So if you're applying to the US, I would recommend that you apply to the southern states where there's no snow, where the weather is more like in India. Like say Texas or Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, or even California, Oregon, Washington, D.C. These are nice places. Of course, it snows in D.C., but I mean, as compared to Michigan or Wisconsin or Connecticut or New York. So in those places, like even in the best universities like MIT and Harvard, the weather in Boston can be really, really bad in the winters. So if you're not used to dealing with snow, you might suffer from sad season sickness, or you might fall into depression, and you might get so disgusted you just want to run away and go back home. It's happened to a lot of students. So I've known that students who were down south, like in Texas or Georgia, were much, much happier in terms of the weather. So also think about the cost of living. Remember that California and New York, and even to some extent Boston, are like really, really expensive places to live in. So in California, to get, even like a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment, like in the Bay Area or even Southern California, would cost around $2,500 per month. How many people in India can afford to pay that rent? So usually what people do is they take a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment and share it between 4 or 5 people. So you will be getting like half a bedroom and you have to share the bathroom with someone, and for that you will still be paying $500, $600 a month. So even if you get a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment, share it with 2 people, you'll still be paying about $1,200 a month. And not everybody can afford it, remember that. So, but in Texas or Georgia or North Carolina or South Carolina or Florida, you can get a 1-bed, 1-bath apartment of your own for just about somewhere between $500 to $800. Like in Arizona, for example, about $600, you could probably get a furnished apartment of your own, 1-bed, 1-bath, where you don't have to suffer with roommates. And sometimes, like in Georgia, you could probably get like a 1-bed, 1-bath apartment for about $800, around that rate. Or even in Texas or in Florida. I mean, you don't have to, think about whether your peace of mind is really important, whether you can afford these places before you apply. Would you rather be in Texas or Georgia where you can have an apartment of your own, or at least 1 room and a bathroom of your own, which every human being deserves? Or would you rather go to New York or Boston or California where you have to share a room and a bathroom with someone and adjust your schedules and put up with all the narrow-minded roommates? Would you rather live like that, or would you rather go to a low-cost place? Think about that. Believe me, it seems like a trivial decision to make. A lot of people think, if I get in Stanford, I'm just going there, come on, and I'm not going to think twice. But suppose you got admission in Stanford and Duke University, you might want to think, because Duke is like an equally good university in North Carolina, in Durham, Raleigh area, and you get equally good jobs after graduating, but the cost of living there is about 1/3 of California. So you can have an apartment of your own, and you might have more peace of mind, is what I'm trying to say. So think about the cost of living. It's an important factor while applying. Remember, if you're sharing your bedroom and sharing the bathroom with someone, it's a big nuisance, big problem all the time. So what rankings of universities must you apply to? Depending on your GPA, your research interests, aligning with the professors of the university, review the rankings of the top 100 universities in different countries and different disciplines, and determine where your chances of admission are the best. So even if your GPA is low, if your GRE or GMAT score is high, it kind of offsets the lower GPA to some extent, and you might get in a slightly above average university. And if your GRE GMAT score is slightly low, if you have a really good GPA, you can still get in an above average university. But to make it to the really top 10 or top 15 universities, you have to have a good GPA and usually a good GRE GMAT score too, and your statement of purpose and recommendation letters, everything has to be like almost perfect, because the competition is just so fierce. So depending on your profile, think about where your chances of admission are best. So what are Ivy League universities? So there's a league of 8 universities in the United States. These are all private universities, very expensive, very difficult to get into, top-notch universities, and they had a common interest in scholarships and in athletics. So they formed a league. They are called the Ivy League universities. They're all mostly in the northeast part of India. So there's Brown University and Columbia University in New York, Cornell, which is in Ithaca in New York State, and Dartmouth University, Harvard in Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania, and Princeton University in New Jersey, and Yale University in Connecticut. So these are the top 8 Ivy League universities. I've noticed that a lot of people, especially in India, don't really know what Ivy League universities are. They seem to think that any top 20 university is an Ivy League university. Or they seem to think that any university in New York or California is an Ivy League university. No, for example, Stanford is not an Ivy League university. Berkeley is not an Ivy League university. Duke is not an Ivy League university. So it's just this association of 8 universities in the Northeast, which once had tied up for athletics and stuff. These 8 universities are called the Ivy League universities, and they're very difficult to get into and very prestigious and also very expensive. These are all private universities. So select universities with optimal cost of tuition. It's very important to study in a highly ranked university, even if it's expensive. So think about whether you want to work for a year or two, save enough money, or take a loan, and then work in one of these universities. So if you're applying for a job later on, companies give a lot of weightage to the ranking and reputation of the university where you studied. So students who studied in a higher ranked university get a much higher salary than ones who studied in a medium or low ranked university. For example, I had a friend who graduated from the University of Florida. That's ranked like top 9 in computer science. And he got a job in Microsoft, and his starting salary was more than $100,000. This was like maybe 10 years back, sometime in 2005. So the guy who graduated with a 4.0 GPA from the University of Florida got a starting salary at Microsoft of more than $100,000 per annum. And there was another guy at Michigan Tech University that was ranked lower than 100. And he also had a 4.0 GPA. And he also got a job in Microsoft, pretty much the same or similar kind of job. But his starting salary was only $62,000 per annum. So see the difference? There's a difference of almost $40,000 in the starting salary. So remember that it's very important to go to a highly ranked university. It's worth it. And public universities and state universities cost much less than private universities. So, for example, a lot of people go to University of California, Berkeley, as opposed to Stanford, mainly because they can't afford Stanford. It's much more expensive than Berkeley. And a state university costs much less than a private university, and much less than a public university too. So, public university, remember, if you have a choice between a private and a public university, and if your financial constraints are a very important factor in determining which university to take up, you might want to apply to public universities. Sometimes they're ranked equally high, but their cost of tuition and cost of living there, and the whole program is much less expensive than a private university. Select universities with optimal cost of tuition. So consider studying while earning. So if you go to the US on a H1 visa, I know a lot of people who worked like 9 to 5, and in the evenings they would attend classes and do homework, and they managed to graduate successfully within 2 years. They were able to do pretty well. And the advantage of having an H1 visa earlier is that you get to file your green card earlier, and you get your green card faster. Or you can earn and then study. Work for 1 or 2 years, save enough money, and then study. You can work for some consultancy in the US if you don't have a full-time job. And you can actually earn in dollars, save in dollars, so you don't have to ask your parents for money. And you don't have to take a loan. Save enough money, and then pursue your master's degree or your PhD. So you'll be kind of financially independent, you'll have a car, you'll have enough money to get a apartment of your own, and you'll be financially well off. So for example, I had a friend who got admission in Johns Hopkins University, which was ranked 23rd in computer science in those days, like 10 years ago. And he got partial scholarship, and he still had to pay about $23,000 in tuition at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, in Maryland. And then he got admission in Michigan Tech University, which was ranked like lower than 100, but he got complete scholarship. So he gave up Johns Hopkins and took up a much lower ranked university simply because he got full scholarship. But after he started earning, like $23,000 is a very small amount to repay. You can repay it in about 6 or 8 months. So I'm sure he must have felt like if he had his life to live over again, he would probably pick Johns Hopkins. You can take a loan and repay it. What I'm trying to say is that it's worth it. You get networking opportunity. You do your master's like once in a lifetime usually. So it's important to go to a university with a very good reputation and ranking. So this is another interesting tip that I would like to give you. Try applying to the arts and sciences department instead of the engineering department. What I mean is, whether you get a master's in computer science or computer engineering, there's very little difference in it. So there's a lot of overlap in the courses that you take. And after you graduate, if you're applying for a job like in Google or Facebook or Microsoft, I don't think they really care whether you studied computer engineering or computer science. You know what I mean? So, but while applying, the computer engineering department is much more difficult to get into as compared to the computer science department. Usually the arts and sciences schools are easier to get admission into. So if you apply to a top university to the arts and sciences department and you get admission, and that might be better for you than going to a lower ranked university to the computer engineering department, because anyway there's an overlap in 80% of the courses that you study. So what I'm trying to say is, it's important to go to a highly ranked university, and if you're smart and if you can't get admission into the computer engineering department, you might as well study computer science. There's very little difference. And when it comes to getting a job, you have the same chances as anyone else who studied computer engineering or computer science. It makes practically no difference. So that's an interesting tip. Think about applying to the computer science department if you don't have what it takes to get admission to the computer engineering department. Okay? Think about that. Connect with the faculty members based on your research interests. So, identify your research interests before you apply. So, talk to your seniors. They are the best people to get advice from at all these universities. Ask them how this particular field is doing in that department at that particular time. Read the research papers that were published by these professors, analyze them, and try and see how you can improve these research papers. Write to the professors about your research interests and your publications, if any. You can find a lot of faculty email addresses on their websites and their phone numbers. Email them, contact them. About 40 to 50% of the professors will be nice enough to reply to you, and some others may not care to reply to you. So it's still worth trying to contact and get in touch with these professors and establish a rapport with them. Remember, in the admissions committee, all the professors have to arrive at a consensus and say, yes, let's accept this student in. This student demonstrates potential. So at least one or two professors have to stand up and say, hey, I know the student. I've been interacting with the student. This student is good. And he's going to help me with my research, and I want to offer him admission. So somebody has to vouch for you, stand up for you. Connect with senior students of the department. So they are the single best people to guide you, whether it comes to roommates or housing or picking the advisors or courses or the university, whatever. They are the best people to guide you. Seniors will also tell you about the actual situation at the university, which you probably don't get online. And they can even advise you to apply somewhere else if that university is not doing very well at that particular point of time. For example, I was once applying for a PhD in entrepreneurship at a few universities, and some PhD students at Duke University at that time, it was like about in 2011 I guess, they told me that about two of their renowned professors from the entrepreneurship department had left the university and gone to another less ranked university due to some politics or some problem. So they said that the particular department in Duke University at that time was not really stable, so you better not come here. You might as well go to that other university. That's what they advised me. So you get all this kind of insider information from your seniors. So connect with senior students of the other departments. So whichever department you're planning to apply to, talk to them, and also talk to similar departments, like talk to the people at the computer science department and the electrical engineering department or the computer engineering department. Try and see which department is doing well. And suppose you were in the University of Arizona, and suppose your seniors told you that, oh, you know what, there's this professor of finance who's really knowledgeable, but he's not interested in teaching. It happens a lot, sometimes it happens. The professor is really interested only in his research. He's not interested in teaching, even though he's really competent and he knows his subject really well. I've had this problem sometimes. So if you want to major in finance, your seniors might advise you, you know what, this professor he's not interested in teaching, he doesn't really do his best, and you probably won't get much knowledge here. So why don't you go to some other university? They might actually guide you in these matters. So now we're going to talk about progressive shortlisting. Now that you know all these parameters and all that universities look for, decide which program you want to pursue. Decide which country you wish to study in. Whether you want to go to UK, US, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Germany, decide where you want to go. After you've decided which program you want to pursue, that is MS in computer science or MBA or MIS or a PhD, first decide that. Then you decide which country you want to go to. And then decide based on geographical considerations, including the cost of living and the ranking of the university, decide which places you want to apply in. And then based on your scores and profile, determine which ranking of universities to apply to. Based on your research at the universities, the tuition cost, the cost of living, etc., shortlist around 20 universities which are most suitable for you. Connect with faculty members and seniors at these universities. Try to assess the situation at the university. Shortlist about 8 to 10 universities from these 20 where your chances are maximal. Finalize these universities and then begin to apply. So this is how you progressively shortlist. Decide which program, and then which country, then which geographical locations. Then based on your scores and profile determine the rankings. And then based on the tuition cost, the reputation of the university, shortlist about 20 universities. And then reduce the number to about 8 or 10. And then apply to 6 or 8 or 10 universities at the most. So this is how you progressively shortlist universities. So this brings us to the end of this video about how to shortlist universities to apply to, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it gives you a wealth of advice about how to shortlist and finalize universities to apply to.